The sun was barely rising over the village of Eldermore when Eric awoke, restless as always. Yet today his unrest carried a heavier weight. The village had long been a place of traditions and rigid hierarchies, where the council, a group of elders chosen not only for their age, but for their wisdom and influence, held the final authority on almost all matters of importance. Nothing in Eldermore happened without the council's blessing, from land transactions to trade negotiations, and, most importantly, marriages. It was a place where personal desire was often considered secondary to duty and social propriety. Eric had always been known as a man of independence, tall, broad-shouldered, with sharp eyes that seemed to look into a person's very intentions. He was both respected and feared. His family, though not poor, had long upheld their own traditions of honor and courage, and Eric had inherited that fierce pride. Yet he also carried a streak of stubbornness that often put him at odds with those who sought to bind him to convention. He had loved freely in the past, though never seriously enough to challenge his family or the council. But now, for the first time, the council had set its sights directly on him, and he knew it was not a request, but a command he could not easily defy. The council had decreed that he must marry Leora, the daughter of another prominent family in Eldermore. The reasoning given was practical. The families were well respected, their lands complementary, and a union would solidify social and political alliances, vital to maintaining stability in the village. It was an arrangement steeped in pragmatism, but to Eric it felt like a shackle. He did not know Leora, had not chosen her, and the thought of pledging his life to someone selected by the elders filled him with bitterness. He had always imagined that love, true love, would be his guide, not duty enforced by others. Peer. The morning of the council meeting was tense. Eric walked through the cobblestone streets, the crisp autumn air brushing against his face, yet he felt no calm. Every step toward the council hall, a stone building with high arched windows and heavy wooden doors, felt like walking into a trap. The villagers he passed offered polite nods or murmured greetings, unaware of the storm brewing in his mind. In Eldermore, the council's decisions were law. Dissent was frowned upon, sometimes punished. Eric's pulse quickened, not out of fear of punishment, but from the anger that this decision had been made without his consent. Inside the council hall, the elders sat in a semicircle, their expressions unreadable, but undeniably authoritative. Their robes were simple, yet dignified, adorned with insignias representing their lineage and position. At the center sat Elder Thomlin, the eldest and most respected among them, whose sharp eyes missed nothing, and whose voice could silence a room with a single word. The council spoke with measured deliberation, laying out their reasoning for the match. They emphasized harmony, duty, and the importance of preserving the village's balance. Every word felt like a blade to Eric's independence. When he tried to interject, they cut him off gently but firmly, reminding him that this was a responsibility, not a preference. And so, with clenched fists hidden at his sides and a tightness in his chest, Eric agreed. He did not speak of love, nor did he smile. His agreement was a silent compromise, compliance without acceptance, a recognition that rebellion would serve neither his family nor himself. As he signed the ceremonial parchment, the weight of inevitability pressed down upon him. He felt as though a part of his life, one that belonged entirely to him, was being claimed by tradition, by duty, by forces beyond his control. Meanwhile, Leora was preparing for the same day in her family home. She, too, was aware that the marriage was arranged, yet she bore it with a quiet dignity. She was thoughtful, careful, and accustomed to the expectations placed upon her by the village. But beneath her composed exterior lay anxiety. What would this union mean for her? She had dreams, small as they were, about a life in which her choices mattered. Yet in Eldermore, a woman of her standing rarely defied the elders. She accepted her fate, not with enthusiasm, but with a kind of wary courage. The wedding day arrived. Eldermore's small square was decorated simply, with banners fluttering in the wind, and the aroma of fresh bread and flowers filling the air. Villagers gathered, exchanging whispers and smiles, eager to witness the union. Eric and Leora stood at the center, bound by the weight of expectation more than affection. The officiating elder spoke words of blessing and duty, and as they exchanged vows, there was no spark, no anticipation in their eyes, only formality. Eric's heart was cold with resentment, and Leora's with apprehension. They were strangers by circumstance, companions by decree. But even in this moment of enforced union, the narrative takes care to highlight subtleties. The slight exchange of glances, the involuntary gesture of reaching for hands, the tiny cracks in their emotional armor that hint at possibilities yet unrealized. The story plants seeds here, foreshadowing that although the marriage began under compulsion, human hearts are resilient and capable of change. Eric spent the evening wandering the perimeter of the village, restless and bitter. He pondered what this marriage would cost him. Not just freedom, but the autonomy to pursue love on his own terms. His thoughts drifted to imagined futures, to paths he would never take, to laughter and warmth that felt just out of reach. He wondered if he would ever come to know the woman beside him, not as an obligation, but as a partner, a companion, even a friend. Leora, meanwhile, retired to her room, contemplating the same unknown, reflecting on how she might navigate this strange, imposed intimacy. In these early hours after the wedding, the story firmly establishes the internal conflict that will drive the narrative. Eric's struggle between duty and desire, and Leora's navigation of obedience and individuality. The tension is palpable, emotional, and sets the stage for the unfolding drama, the evolution of two lives intertwined not by choice, but by circumstance, and the slow, careful path toward understanding, respect, and ultimately, love. The morning after the wedding, Eldermore was quiet, save for the gentle crowing of roosters and the rustle of leaves stirred by a soft wind. Inside Eric's family home, the newlyweds awoke to a house that now felt more confining than ever. Though they shared a bed, the emotional distance between them was palpable. Eric lay awake for hours, staring at the rough wooden beams above, the image of the council's stern faces lingering in his mind. He felt trapped, bound not just by vows, but by centuries of tradition that insisted a man marry for duty, not desire. Leora, on the other hand, rose early, carefully arranging the room, adjusting the simple furnishings to her taste. She was aware that her presence in this house was new, unwelcome even, in the eyes of her husband. She moved cautiously, trying not to overstep the invisible boundaries Eric had drawn around himself. Her movements were precise, deliberate, a quiet attempt to assert her own identity while simultaneously respecting the unspoken rules of their household. Their first breakfast together was a silent affair. Eric pushed his food around his plate, avoiding eye contact, his mind replaying every moment of the council meeting. Leora tried to speak of small, everyday matters: the weather, the crops, the preparation for the coming harvest, but her voice was met with monosyllabic responses. Eric did not mean to be cruel. His silence was a shield, a way of protecting himself from disappointment and resentment. He did not want to invest in someone forced upon him, lest hope twist into bitterness. Yet, even amid tension, there were subtle moments of observation that marked the beginning of awareness. Eric noticed Leora's careful attention to cleanliness. The way she arranged their modest home with understated elegance. The softness in her voice, even when she spoke with caution. Leora noticed his quiet strength, the way he carried himself, and the fleeting moments where his eyes revealed a depth of thought and emotion he tried to conceal. These small observations were seeds planted in silence, invisible to the villagers outside, but laying the groundwork for understanding. Days passed, and the routine of their forced companionship began to create friction. Eric, used to solitude and independence, found himself irritated by Leora's presence. Even her most innocuous actions, folding laundry a certain way, tending the hearth meticulously, felt like an intrusion on his personal space. Arguments flared over trivial matters, each clash steeped in misunderstanding. Eric accused her of being overbearing, while Leora felt dismissed and undervalued. The tension grew, yet neither could retreat entirely. The expectations of duty and the watchful eyes of the village demanded that they remain united. Despite their conflicts, moments of reluctant cooperation began to emerge. One afternoon, during a sudden rainstorm, Eric struggled to secure the barn door. Leora, noticing his difficulty, offered a hand without hesitation. Eric initially stiffened, pride warring with practicality, but the door was heavy, and eventually he allowed her help. Their hands brushed briefly, and for the first time, there was a flicker of recognition. Two people, forced together, discovering that cooperation could ease their burdens. It was not love, not yet, but it was the beginning of acknowledgement, a silent truce forged in necessity. The village also played its role in shaping the couple's early interactions. Gossip was unavoidable. Neighbors commented on the newlyweds' behavior, speculating about the state of their marriage. Eldermore's traditions demanded appearances, and both Eric and Leora found themselves compelled to present a united front. Leora, sensitive to public perception, often softened her expressions, offering polite smiles despite tension. Eric, while resistant to being controlled by appearances, began to realize that hostility toward his wife would only amplify scrutiny. The subtle pressure of society nudged them toward cautious civility. Evenings were particularly challenging. The couple dined together, sometimes in silence, sometimes in tense conversation. Eric's mind wandered to dreams deferred, while Leora wondered if he could ever see her as more than a duty fulfilled. Sleep came fitfully, and yet these nights became a space for observation and reflection. Eric noted the small ways Leora cared for him. A warm cloth for his face when he returned tired from labor. A quiet cup of tea left beside his bed. Leora noticed the rare moments when Eric spoke with honesty, when he shared a thought about the village or an opinion on the land. Each small act chipped away at their initial resentment, though neither was willing to admit it. The turning point in these early days was subtle, almost imperceptible. One morning, Eric went to the fields to check on the livestock, only to find Leora already there, tending to the chores, with a competence and calm he had not expected. She greeted him with a polite nod, and in her eyes he saw not deference, but quiet determination. Something stirred within him, an awareness that this woman, imposed upon him by the council, possessed qualities he respected: pride, competence, and a willingness to work alongside him rather than demand subservience. At the same time, Leora began to notice Eric's protective instincts. During a minor accident in the barn, when a crate threatened to fall, Eric's swift reaction prevented injury. Leora's heart pounded, not just from fear, but from recognition that this man, who had initially seemed cold and unyielding, possessed courage, decisiveness, and care beneath his stern exterior. The very qualities she had been told to expect from her husband, strength, leadership, honor, were present, though wrapped in the bitterness of resentment and pride. By the end of the first week of their married life, the emotional landscape of their relationship had shifted, albeit subtly. They had moved from rigid distance to cautious acknowledgement, from resentment to reluctant curiosity. While neither spoke of love, they began to see the humanity in each other, the shared desires for respect, competence, and understanding. It was a fragile equilibrium, but it was the first step toward connection. The days following their uneasy first week of marriage had settled into a fragile rhythm. Eric and Leora had begun to navigate the daily chores of their home with a grudging cooperation, their silent glances and small gestures speaking volumes that neither dared to acknowledge aloud. Yet life in Eldermore was never gentle for long. The village, though governed by traditions, existed on the edge of wilderness, its fields vulnerable to sudden storms, its livestock susceptible to disease, and its people constantly aware of the precarious balance between survival and disaster. It was during one of these moments of uncertainty that Eric and Leora would find themselves forced to confront the first real test of their relationship. A violent storm struck Eldermore unexpectedly, tearing through the valley, with wind so fierce it bent trees nearly to the ground and sent torrents of rain cascading across the farmland. Eric had been checking on the northern sheepfold when the sky darkened and the first sheets of rain fell. Leora, inside the main house, felt the walls shudder and knew immediately that the livestock, the sheep, goats, and even the horses, were in danger. Without hesitation, she grabbed her coat and ran into the tempest, despite the danger, determined to assist her husband in securing the animals. Eric, initially startled to see Leora braving the storm, felt a surge of mixed emotions. Fear for her safety collided with reluctant admiration for her courage. Her presence, once a source of irritation, became a lifeline. Together, soaked and exhausted, they worked to secure the livestock. The storm raged around them, a force of nature they could neither resist nor control, forcing them to rely on each other completely. Eric gave instructions, his voice cutting over the wind, while Leora executed tasks with efficiency and composure. They moved in tandem, discovering a rhythm that had been impossible when resentment and distance dominated their interactions. In the struggle against the storm, moments of physical closeness were unavoidable. Eric's hands grasped hers to steady her as she climbed onto the makeshift pen, and she instinctively leaned into him for balance. For the first time, there was no resentment in their touch, only necessity and trust. The closeness sparked a subtle emotional awakening in both of them. They began to recognize that the person they had once seen as an obligation could also be a partner, a collaborator, someone with whom they could face the unpredictable challenges of life. After hours of battling the storm, they finally managed to secure the animals and return to the safety of the house, drenched and exhausted. Inside, the warmth of the hearth and the quiet of the home provided a stark contrast to the chaos outside. They removed their wet clothes, and for the first time, they allowed themselves a moment to simply exist together, without argument or pretense. Arik, who had been so guarded since the council's decree, felt an unfamiliar emotion, gratitude, tinged with admiration. He looked at Leora not as the woman imposed upon him, but as someone whose presence had been essential, whose courage and skill had prevented disaster. Leora, sitting by the fire and warming her chilled hands, noticed a new softness in Arik's demeanor. He did not offer empty praise, but there was a quiet acknowledgement in his gaze, a recognition of her competence and bravery. She realized, perhaps for the first time, that this man was not merely a figure of authority or stubborn pride. He was capable of respect, and, more importantly, he was capable of partnership. This moment, born out of necessity, planted the first seeds of genuine affection between them. The storm also had consequences that extended beyond the physical. Several fences had been destroyed, and the northern field was waterlogged, threatening the early harvest. As Arik and Leora worked together to repair the damage in the days that followed, their collaboration deepened. They communicated more openly, sharing ideas and strategies, discovering each other's strengths. Leora's knowledge of plants and crops complemented Arik's practical skills in building and animal husbandry. Slowly, the emotional walls they had built began to erode, replaced by mutual respect, reliance, and an emerging sense of companionship. Meanwhile, the villagers observed these developments with quiet fascination. Eldermore's social structure valued strength and competence, and they began to notice that Arik and Leora were no longer merely complying with duty. They were functioning as a team. Gossip shifted subtly. Praise for their effectiveness replaced idle speculation about discontent. This external validation further encouraged the couple to work together rather than remain distant. Another pivotal moment came when a small misunderstanding threatened to undo the fragile trust they had begun to cultivate. One morning, a horse under Leora's care had injured its leg. Arik arrived to find her tending to it, worried but determined. He questioned her approach, suggesting a different method to treat the injury, and Leora bristled, feeling that he was doubting her competence. Their voices rose, tension flaring. Yet, after a pause, Arik softened, recognizing that his pride had colored his words. Leora, seeing the same moment of vulnerability in him, adjusted her response. Together, they found a compromise, treating the horse successfully and learning a valuable lesson. Conflict could be resolved without resentment if approached with understanding and patience. This event, like the storm, reinforced an essential truth. They were stronger together than apart. Arik's initial reluctance, based on pride and obligation, began to give way to a tentative emotional bond. Leora's initial hesitation, grounded in obedience and caution, began to be replaced with a growing recognition of Arik's depth, strength, and capacity for trust. Emotional intimacy, though still unspoken, was beginning to emerge in subtle ways. Shared glances, brief touches, a conversation that lingers a moment longer than necessary. By the end of this outline, Arik and Leora are no longer strangers forced into proximity. They are allies, partners, And slowly, individuals whose admiration for each other grows alongside their reliance on one another. They have faced danger together, navigated misunderstandings, and discovered the value of cooperation. While love is not yet fully realized, the emotional landscape has shifted dramatically. The foundations of trust, respect, and appreciation have been laid, setting the stage for deeper emotional attachment. Weeks had passed since the storm, and the minor crisis with the injured horse, and life in Eldermore had settled into a rhythm that was both comforting and challenging for Eric and Leora. They had moved beyond the mere mechanics of daily chores and begun to understand each other on a deeper level. Where before their marriage had been a tense dance of avoidance and obligation, now there were moments, quiet, fleeting, but significant, where understanding and emotional intimacy began to surface. One of the first catalysts for this deeper emotional connection came during a visit to the nearby woods to gather firewood and medicinal herbs. Eric had always appreciated the woods for their solitude, a place to think freely without the constant gaze of the village. Leora, unfamiliar with much of the forest, walked beside him cautiously, following his lead. She listened attentively as he described the different plants, their uses, and the subtle changes in the seasons. She was impressed not only by his knowledge, but also by the care and attention he gave to every detail. Arik, in turn, noticed her curiosity, her attentiveness, and her willingness to learn. In these moments, the walls of resentment began to crumble, replaced by a budding admiration that neither fully understood yet. The woods also became the setting for their first truly personal conversation, as they rested beside a stream. Leora spoke softly of her childhood dreams, of wanting to travel beyond Eldermore, of imagining a life where her choices mattered. Eric, usually reserved with words, shared a memory of his own, a time when he had helped a neighbor rescue a trapped calf, feeling pride not in accomplishment, but in being trusted and needed. They realized that despite their initial differences and the circumstances that forced their union, they shared values, honor, responsibility, and a deep desire to protect and nurture life. This conversation planted the seeds for mutual respect and emotional connection, bridging the gap between duty and desire. Their growing closeness was tested soon after, when news arrived that Eldermore's grain store had been partially destroyed in the storm, threatening the village's food supply for the coming months. The council convened immediately, urging all capable villagers to assist in repairs and redistribution. Eric and Leora, accustomed now to working together, took leadership in the effort. Eric coordinated the rebuilding of storage structures, while Leora organized the villagers, distributing tasks and ensuring that everyone's skills were used efficiently. Their teamwork became exemplary, visible to all, and the villagers began to whisper not only admiration, but also a sense of hope. This union, once forced, was proving strong and capable. It was during this collective effort that personal emotions began to surface more distinctly. Eric found himself feeling a protective instinct that went beyond mere partnership. He worried when Leora stayed too long in the rain while directing laborers, and he noticed the way her hands were raw from hard work. He began to offer small gestures of care, fetching water for her, draping his coat over her shoulders during chilly mornings, even teaching her quicker ways to complete heavy tasks. These were not declarations of love, yet they carried the warmth of concern and attention that was slowly breaking down the barriers in his heart. Leora, meanwhile, began to see Eric in a new light. His stoic exterior masked an unexpected gentleness and integrity. She observed the patience with which he dealt with quarrelsome villagers, the fairness with which he allocated work, and the calm determination with which he approached problems. Where she had once seen only a stubborn, controlling man, she now recognized a leader capable of empathy and thoughtfulness. And most profoundly, she felt seen, truly seen, not as a daughter or a duty or a possession, but as a capable partner, someone whose opinions mattered and whose presence was valued. Their growing emotional connection, however, was not without tension. Eric's pride and habitual reserve often clashed with Leora's gentle insistence on communication and collaboration. Misunderstandings continued, albeit less frequently, and sometimes they would retreat to separate spaces to cool tempers. Yet even these moments were different from before. They ended in reflection rather than stubborn resentment. Each argument became an opportunity to understand one another better, to navigate differences with patience rather than pride, and to recognize the emerging bond that was quietly transforming their marriage. The turning point in their emotional journey came during a quiet evening after the grain store repairs had been completed. Exhausted, they sat together by the hearth in their home, tending the fire. Eric, without consciously deciding to, began to speak softly, recounting the day's events with humor and humility, an unusual vulnerability for him. Leora laughed, a sound so clear and heartfelt that it softened the last remnants of his bitterness. They shared stories from their past, small dreams and regrets, and for the first time, neither felt obligated to mask their true selves. The distance that had defined their early marriage was replaced by a sense of comfort, intimacy, and emerging trust. It was in these quiet moments that the first stirrings of romantic feelings began to take root. Eric realized he looked forward to her presence, that he missed her when she was occupied elsewhere. Leora, in turn, felt her heart lift in moments when he complimented her efforts or simply acknowledged her presence with a thoughtful glance. Their relationship, which had begun as duty-bound and reluctant, was evolving into genuine affection, subtle, cautious, and almost imperceptible, yet undeniably present. The villagers, too, noticed the change. While gossip had initially focused on resentment and distance, whispers now carried a different tone. Admiration for the couple's competence, curiosity about the growing bond, and quiet approval of their emerging partnership. Even the council, observing from afar, remarked that the union they had imposed had yielded unexpected harmony. These external observations reinforced the couple's internal journey, though they were unaware of the full depth of emotions developing between them. By the end of this outline, Eric and Leora have crossed a significant threshold. They are no longer merely partners in survival or co-workers in labor. They are becoming emotionally intertwined. Respect, admiration, and trust have replaced the initial resentment and reluctance. The narrative is now poised for the next stage, the deepening of romantic feelings, moments of vulnerability, and the challenges that test whether their emerging love can withstand both internal doubts and external pressures. The weeks and months following the storm and the grain store repairs passed with the rhythm of daily life in Eldermore. But for Eric and Leora, life had changed in ways neither could have anticipated. What had begun as a reluctant and duty-bound marriage had evolved into a partnership founded on mutual respect, shared experience, and growing affection. Yet, the final step toward genuine love required a moment of trial, a challenge that would test not only their commitment to one another, but also the depth of their emotional connection. The pivotal moment arrived in the form of an external crisis, one that threatened both their home and the village's livelihood. A wandering herd of wild cattle, driven by hunger and displacement from neighboring lands, entered Eldermore's valley, trampling crops and threatening the livestock. Panic spread among the villagers, and the council quickly called upon all able-bodied individuals to prevent disaster. Arik, naturally assuming a leadership role, organized defensive measures, while Leora mobilized villagers to safeguard crops and livestock. Unlike previous challenges, this threat carried an urgency that required coordination, strategy, and personal courage in equal measure. As they worked side by side, Arik and Leora's bond was on full display. They moved seamlessly together, communicating with a mix of words, gestures, and shared understanding. Leora's sharp observation and quick thinking complemented Arik's decisiveness and physical strength. In moments of danger, Arik instinctively positioned himself to shield her, his protective instincts heightened not by obligation, but by genuine care. Leora, in turn, trusted him completely, following his guidance and offering suggestions with confidence, knowing he would listen. This mutual trust had been forged through shared trials, and it now became the foundation for a deeper emotional connection. At the height of the chaos, a young villager, panicked and caught in the stampede, slipped and fell. Leora immediately rushed to help, but Arik reached her first, pulling her aside and shielding the child from harm. Their eyes met in the fleeting moment, and neither could deny the surge of emotion that passed between them. Gratitude, concern, and admiration converged, and in that instant, the barriers of duty and resentment that had dominated their early marriage shattered completely. Arik realized he could not imagine life without Leora, and Leora recognized that her heart had long since moved beyond mere respect or partnership. After the immediate danger passed and the cattle were driven away, Arik and Leora stood together at the edge of the village, surveying the aftermath. Crops had been damaged, fences torn apart, but no lives were lost. Exhausted, soaked, and covered in dirt, they shared a quiet moment of triumph. Arik, for the first time since the council had forced their marriage, spoke words of genuine warmth and admiration. He acknowledged Leora's courage, intelligence, and unwavering support, expressing gratitude not as a formality, but as a heartfelt recognition of her significance in his life. Leora, her eyes glistening, responded with honesty and emotion, admitting her own admiration and affection for him. In this exchange, the emotional climax of their story was reached. Duty had given way to love, and respect had transformed into passion. Their relationship, now solidified by experience and shared adversity, grew stronger with each passing day. The villagers, observing this transformation, celebrated not only the couple's love, but also their contributions to the community. The union, once forced and viewed skeptically, became an emblem of harmony, partnership, and the possibility of love flourishing even in unexpected circumstances. Arik and Leora became leaders in the truest sense, not merely figures of authority, but exemplars of resilience, empathy, and devotion. The narrative also explores moments of private intimacy that cement their bond. One evening, after the village celebrations honoring the preservation of the harvest, Eric and Leora returned home. The night was quiet, the moonlight filtering through the windows, casting a gentle glow across their modest home. They spoke of dreams once deferred, of hopes for the future, and of the life they wanted to build together. Leora rested her head on Eric's shoulder, and he held her close, feeling the warmth and security of a partnership chosen not by decree, but by the hearts of both individuals. This quiet domestic scene symbolizes the culmination of their emotional journey, where love, understanding, and shared experience converge. Beyond personal happiness, their love brought new vitality to Eldermore itself. The council, initially skeptical of the match, recognized the couple's exemplary qualities and began to encourage more collaborative decision-making among the villagers. Eric and Leora's story became a lesson in how trust, respect, and courage could transform obligation into genuine affection and collective benefit. Their lives intertwined with the community's fortunes, demonstrating that love and duty need not be mutually exclusive. The resolution also highlights the internal transformation of both characters. Eric, once fiercely independent and resistant to societal expectations, learns that vulnerability and trust can coexist with strength and autonomy. He discovers that choosing to love, even within the bounds of tradition, can bring fulfillment and joy. Leora, initially obedient and cautious, gains confidence in her own abilities and realizes that her voice, intelligence, and courage are valued not only by the village, but most importantly, by the man she has come to love. Their growth is mirrored in their shared home, which becomes a place of warmth, laughter, and collaboration, a testament to their evolving relationship. Finally, the story concludes with a scene that emphasizes both closure and hope. Eric and Leora stand together on a hill overlooking the village at sunset, holding hands, their faces reflecting peace and contentment. The hardships, trials, and initial resentment that had defined their union have been transformed into love, respect, and partnership. The council, villagers, and even the landscape itself bear witness to the couple's journey, a narrative of growth, courage, and the transformative power of shared experience. Their marriage, once imposed by authority, is now a testament to the enduring nature of human connection, the ability of love to flourish under the most unlikely circumstances, and the fulfillment that comes from mutual trust, respect, and dedication.